I give this advice all the time. If you're lost or confused as a creative, the only way out is to create through it. That's it. I think that's scary advice, but it is the truth. Like the one thing we never stopped doing, if you look back at the past 5 years on the channel, is we just never stopped uploading. We just didn't. We just kept making, even in the lowest of lows, like that was the thing that we will do no matter what. And we just kept creating.
In this episode, I talked to Samir of Colin and Samir fame from the YouTube channel. They have built a really interesting business, and it's been fun to get to know them recently. They're in the process of switching over their newsletter to ConvertKit, actually. In this episode, we talk about flywheels. We talk about how they built and structured their whole business, what drives revenue. It's mostly sponsorships. And then we get into storytelling and really at the end, we would talk about like designing their perfect day, what's driving growth on YouTube, and so much more. Quick little backstory before we dive in. So Colin and Samir both played lacrosse in high school, and they actually ended up meeting through lacrosse videos that they were both uploading online. And then over time, they built a YouTube channel about lacrosse. They turned it into basically, an online TV network about lacrosse that was acquired. And then after that, they spent a couple years at the company that acquired them, and then they went out and decided to make new content specifically for creators. So they've got a show, they've got a newsletter, a bunch of different stuff. But it's just a fun story of two people really shining in a specific niche, and then from there taking what they learned and serving the broader community with it. So I'll get out of the way. I think you'll enjoy the episode. But before I do, go ahead and write a review. If you could write a review on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening, I would appreciate that. And then maybe tell someone else about the podcast. Over the last handful of episodes, we've had a lot of growth, and that's fun. And it kind of reminds me that, like, in addition to doing the show, I need to drive growth for it. So it's good. It's fun to see the numbers go up, fun to hear, more people tuning in and listening. So with that, I'll get out of the way. Enjoy this interview with Samir. Samir, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
All right. So I want to start with, I was watching one of your interviews that you did with Lily Singh, and she talks about this moment where she's over at another YouTuber's house for the first time. And he talks about how he's like, yeah, I bought this house with YouTube money. And like, it rocks her world, breaks the mold of like what she thought was possible. So I'm wondering, for you and Colin, or you in particular, was there a moment where you were like kind of that mind blown, like, wait, I can actually do this? I can build a business, any of those kind of things. Anything stand out for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what's interesting is I can more remember the moment where I was like, whoa, this might be impossible. Which is, back in 2011, when I had graduated college, I took to YouTube to start uploading videos about lacrosse, which is the sport I played. And, I had this big dream that we could create a modern day sports network about lacrosse. And I had talked to some people who worked at YouTube because I went to school in Northern California. And, what I kind of understood was you upload videos to YouTube and then YouTube pays you. And there's people making millions of dollars on YouTube. Again, this is 2011. So there was actually only a few stories like that.
Yep.
But I was pretty quick to believe that was possible. And I remember uploading and getting into the partner program. And then the first time it showed estimated revenue, and it was like 43 cents. And I remember the moment of taking a step back and being like, whoa, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So I'd say like, I remember that inverse moment very well. I think what was interesting was from then it was a gradual experience of, finding our way to revenue and making it a career was very different from us than it was for other creators. Creator like Lily Singh was pretty quick to having like a large appeal and to reaching, a mass audience. We were in a niche audience, a very small niche audience that didn't really have a culture of advertising or video advertising. And so the way we monetized at first was doing like creative projects, like building websites for people. And, we even designed stickers for a lacrosse company. Like we were just doing any creative project and using our YouTube channel as lead gen. It wasn't until years and years later when advertising revenue on the channel through sponsorships became a real factor.
Okay, so with the lacrosse YouTube channel, you're saying it was lead gen for an agency basically, and not even like an official
Essentially,
agency,
yeah.
like a scrappy, we'll do anything for you kind of agency.
That's exactly right. It was just like, the only way people could understand it in 2011, especially in sports, where sports media was saved for television, right? Like that was TV. It was not what was happening on YouTube. And I think for us, it was just people looking at us being like, these guys can make good videos. That was basically it. And then people would come to us and say, oh, if you can make videos, we assume you could take photos and we assume you could do graphic design. And, that's exactly right. It was just a top of funnel for people to understand our creative talents. And for us, we just needed to keep the lights on so we could keep uploading YouTube videos.
Now, what was the point when it actually worked to start getting sponsorships? Was it a certain number of viewers, or was it more like a certain level of business acumen on your part or connections?
Yeah, I think there was a certain level of, business acumen that had to come from us understanding how the media business worked, and also developing like a menu of products that people could buy and understanding what the market wanted to buy from us. Sponsorships was just not one of those things for a long time.
Yeah.
Until, there was a level of audience, a level of brand, and the like a hot word, I think, in our space, but like, to be honest, it was community. I think once people started to recognize that there was a regular set of people watching who were willing to do what, when we said, hey, let's all do this thing, then they would all do that thing. And recognizing that we were becoming community leaders in our niche community, I think is when people started to take notice and brands took us seriously, because we knocked on the doors of a lot of brands, including Nike, including Under Armour, walking into their office saying, we are the hub for this. You guys have invested in lacrosse. You have lacrosse equipment. Mm-hmm. We have that audience. And I don't think anyone took it seriously until we started doing certain community initiatives where we would, say, hey, we're all going to post about this on this day. And then all of a sudden you'd see every lacrosse player, posting a certain picture or a certain campaign on one day on Instagram or on Twitter. And like, I think that's when it becomes very loud in a small community, when everyone is doing the same thing and there's one singular, leader of the pack.
Okay, so break that down, because I think a lot of people, take the advice of like, be the big fish in the small pond, choosing your niche, but you're talking about a specific strategy to be a lot more vocal in that space. So what were you doing to like get people to rally behind that one thing and demonstrate that you were the leader there?
I think what we recognized was in any community, you want to feel less alone, right? Like you want to feel that there's people like you. And I felt that as being a member of the lacrosse community, there was not very many people here in Los Angeles who wanted to talk about lacrosse, who wanted to, share ideas about lacrosse, who wanted to get excited about something that happened in lacrosse. So the internet is really what opened up that door and created a situation where we could have that collective conversation. Now, I think what a lot of people need in a community is guidance on what to talk about or how to talk about it. And so we really, I would say it's like kind of when Instagram launched. We used to do it on YouTube, but we would just issue, ideas about what to post about, or actually do call outs. Like when it started snowing, we just asked people to send us photos of them playing lacrosse in the snow. And, all of a sudden people were sending us pictures. So you started to realize like constraints are super helpful for communities to increase interactions and engagement. Is just saying, hey, on this week, we're all talking about this, or we're all posting photos about this. Now you can actually go around, and whether it's through a hashtag or just, through being a part of that community in the comments of a YouTube video, start to engage with others who are like you. And I think today, 10 years, 11 years later, we're seeing that happen on Discord. We're seeing it happen through Reddit communities. We're seeing it happen in all different facets of the internet. But at that early stage, I think that's what we recognized was we went quickly from thinking, oh, we're a television network on the internet, to we are actually community leaders and tribe leaders that are programming conversation, interaction, engagement for this group of people.
That's super interesting, of getting people to take the same action and demonstrate like, hey, I'm a part of this community, or even just this is what we're talking about this week. Is there an example of how you do that with the Colin and Samir show now, that where you're doing that like same concept?
Yeah, I think, for us, we like to think about everything we do with the Colin and Samir channel. Like we're curating, what's happening in the creator world, because there's an abundance of information, which means there's a scarcity of attention. And so for us, we are, zoning in on what you should be attentive to. And then more importantly, why that matters to people like us. And this concept of people like us is always been an important part of our career from the beginning. In lacrosse, it was, hey, you are people like us. We are people like us. This is a collective group of people who all share the same identity and same things that we're excited about. In the creator world, I think there, was a void of a voice of what is the thing we should all care about right now, and how can we talk about this and share excitement around it. And so through our weekly show on Monday, we pick a topic that we feel is, the biggest topic of the week in our opinion. We'll talk about it, we'll break it down, and we'll talk about why it matters. And we'll see, conversation in the comments of the YouTube video. We'll see conversation in our DMs. We'll see conversation on Twitter. And, for us, of course, that's not like, we are not the single source in our space of what people are talking about, but we want to be the space where people can come and say, I heard a lot about that thing. Why does it matter to people like us, to people like me? Right. And coming to Colin and Samir to understand a perspective on why it matters. So we do that through our weekly show every Monday. We also do it through the newsletter, which is the published press. It comes out every Tuesday and Friday. And that allows us to go a little bit deeper with 3 stories in each send. And what we see a lot of there is in the replies of that newsletter is people wanting to engage and reply back to our perspective with their perspective, or in agreement, or something else, or some other news that they find important and want to hear our perspective on. And so I think today it's very similar, where we are all a part of this one community. We all are creators. We care about what's happening in the world of creators. We care about these new roadmaps that are being developed, this career of, making money off of your own creativity, off of the thing that you're passionate about. But with all of this information coming out on an hourly basis, like, what should we all be talking about? What are the highlight moments that actually are defining this space? So I think curation is incredibly important in a lot of these communities, where I know I'm a part of the community, but I need help understanding what matters. And I need help understanding why it matters. And then that gives me a basis to have a conversation with someone else in my community, where I can have common ground with them because we both consume the same thing. We both heard the same topic. It was reinforced to me that topic matters. And now I can go and pass it along to someone else in my community.
Yeah. And I can see that really shift from commenting on the conversation, helping people understand the conversation, to at some point down the road, driving the conversation, where this thing might be happening in a very small area, no one's noticing it. And then you're saying, no, this is what you should pay attention to. And that becomes the broader conversation in the creator community.
Now, I'll also say that in both instances, this was not neither business or channel or content was this incredibly well thought out content strategy in advance of, hey, we're going to do it like this. It was both times around. It was Colin and I, growing up as lacrosse players, feeling like there was a void of a community where we could plug into. It was something we wanted. We were creating something for our younger selves and for our present selves that we wanted to exist. Second time around with Colin and Samir, it's the exact same thing. Like when we started on YouTube in 2011, as I mentioned, I didn't have that much information about how it worked. I didn't know what community I was a part of. I felt very isolated, felt like I was on an island trying to do this as a career. And I wanted a hub where I could turn to, hear stories about how other people were doing it, get inspired. I loved shows like How I Built This. I loved hearing about entrepreneurs, but I felt like they weren't covering the entrepreneurs that I was connecting with, people who are doing it through their own content or creativity. So, over time, it was not a like, let's launch this channel about creators. It was a 4-year process to find our content and find our voice through just repetition of making, and making what we wanted to exist and what was interesting to us. And I think that's really important, that you actually do want to make what you're making, and you care about what you're making, and you would make it, because for 4 years we did make it with like the Colin and Samir channel we uploaded to for 4 years without making money from it. And we really care about these stories. We found a format that works. We are speaking to the community that we were always speaking to. It's just bigger now. And we've been able to brand it in a way and package it in a way that it's becoming a business. But this is just something we wanted to exist. We are a part of this community. We felt like this show that we're making, we wanted to exist. So I think that's a really important part of creating for a community, is that you're a part of that community and you deeply understand why it needs to exist.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot that I want to dig into there. I want to, for people who don't know your story, I want to go through the lacrosse side a little bit before we dive in, kind of give that backstory. Mm-hmm. So you scaled the lacrosse channel and that whole network until you exited. What kind of that, like maybe the time period of first revenue through to, actually selling the channel? What did that look like?
Yeah. So, again, first revenue in was just like creative projects. I think it was building a website for a pro lacrosse player. I think that was it. And I think they paid us $1,000 to do that. And I remember there's 3 of us involved. Colin was one of them, and Julian was our other partner in that. And I remember all of us being like, how crazy is it that someone's willing to pay us $1,000 to design their website?
Yes.
And so I think, that was the early stages. I don't know if I still have access to them, but I remember putting together a pitch deck for a brand, showing them that we had 300 subscribers. And I remember being really excited about that and pitching to them saying that although we have 300 subscribers, I know that all 300 of them are your customers, because all we talk about is lacrosse. So like it's nearly impossible for them not to be interested in your product, right? Yeah. So I just remember knowing that very well in our pitches that, if you got 1 million sports fans together, it's still not as powerful as our 1,000 lacrosse fans for you specifically. And that story was very powerful. Our first advertising agreements were more like custom content because there was no real culture around like integrations at the time. It was more, you come produce this thing and then you put it out on your own YouTube channel. And so it was very like custom. We would fly all over to produce something and then distribute it on the channel. And, these deals looked like $1,000 here, $2,000 there. So not enough for all of us to get paid and make money. But where we did find revenue was in those like creative projects that we would do, freelance gigs that were in and out of lacrosse, just creative work that we could find. Now, what was happening though was the community was building. As the audience started building, I think, what was really helpful for us was we had a very tight connection with the platform, with YouTube. YouTube was very supportive of what we were doing. They were really interested in sports, and they had a deep desire to become a home for sports. And one of their desires was being a home for live sports. And so we all got together and figured out how to live stream on the channel, and YouTube helped us with that. And one of the first things we did was go out and acquire live rights. And we went from, uploading content that were like vlogs and highlights and news and analysis to becoming the largest distributor of live sports on YouTube. And that really helped build the community because we were offering free live lacrosse. And there was a scarcity of that. It was not on ESPN. It was not on any of the major networks. So we became the home from high school all the way up to professional lacrosse we were distributing on our channel. And you could watch the games live. And that was one of the biggest growth drivers because it's almost like these moments for the community to come together. Like appointment viewing allows for the community to actually all come together at one point in time. And so there was a bit of a snowball effect in those first 2 years of, we knew we wanted to upload a piece of content every single day. Sometimes it was a live game. Sometimes it was Colin and I hopping on and talking about what we thought about in the world of lacrosse. Sometimes it was, a highlight package. Sometimes it was a 15-second clip. Like it was all types of content. We just knew we needed the doors to open every day so the community could come in and talk. And so as the community started growing, I think there was a very tangible feel to it. I think YouTube knew it, and YouTube was helping us tell that story quite a bit. They were connecting us. We were talking to people from UFC, from NBA, from other sports leagues, because YouTube wanted us to tell the story of how to build a sports network on the platform. And that was really helpful for us and got us enough exposure to, eventually a company called Whistle Sports picked up the phone and called us and said, hey, what you guys are doing in lacrosse, like we believe the future of sports is going to be on social. and we like what you're doing for lacrosse. We want to replicate that across all verticals. And you guys have, a 2.5 year head start figuring all of this out. So we want to buy your network and we want to bring your team on to help us do the same. And I would say, to be honest, that was it was unbelievable from a validation standpoint, because we were like, there was really hard times in those 2 years of understanding if we were wasting our time or not. The thing that kept us going was the audience and the audience's excitement in what we were doing and providing a value to this community. But it was hard because there was not much validation outside of that. And this moment was like incredibly validating, and something that where we realized we were doing something of value and that there was a model here that could work. And, selling the channel and selling the business and joining the company, for us, of course, it was like an awesome moment of success and accomplishment. But more importantly, it was an entrance to, like Colin and I always call this our MBA, where we walked in and we learned how the business worked. This was a company that had raised a lot of money, had a lot of high stakes. We were employees 17, 18, and 19, and we had to make this work. And so now we went from being excited about growing an audience, finding odd jobs to make money, to being in a situation where we didn't have to do odd jobs anymore. We could focus 100% on the channel. We were surrounded by people who had experience in media, who knew how to sell. We had a legal team. We had a creator partnerships team. And we got to sit in a room and in a more relaxed manner, understand how the business worked, and then apply that to what we were doing in lacrosse, and then develop a model that could be replicated. Yeah. So, from a decision-making standpoint on the acquisition, it was either that or keep doing odd jobs and uploading. It was a pretty simple choice, because I knew that, doing this would introduce us to the world of how this actually works. Not how it worked in our scrappy, startup way, but how this business actually works.
Are you able to share any of the numbers or details from the acquisition, or like what view counts were at the time or anything like that?
Yeah, I think the channel had like 80,000 subscribers.
Okay.
At the time. I think our viewership was no more than, it was depending on the content. I think we were probably doing like 20, 30,000 views a video at the time. Outside of that, I can't share the number on the acquisition, but I will say, like, we all were like, probably the best part of it was that we all got salaried. And like, there was this like deep breath out of like, oh my God, we're making money doing this. The acquisition from like a buying the channel, I don't think anyone knew how to price something like that. Yeah. And I think that was both, in our favor and also parts of it were disadvantageous that it was so new and fresh. But overall, it was an incredible.
What year was that?
That was 2014.
Okay. Yeah, that's very early.
So fresh. Yeah, it was a net positive because of the fact that we got, high level jobs doing what we wanted to do, and that we were able to have like a liquidity event that made the past couple of years like make sense.
What was for you, one of the biggest or a couple of the biggest takeaways from your time at Whistle Sports, right? You got to see inside how a bigger company works. You said it was your MBA. What were some of those takeaways where you're like, oh, I don't think I would have learned that, outside of having this opportunity?
I think I learned a lot about sales. That was one of the most important things. I was very close with the chief revenue officer there, who now is at Barstool, and I was very close with the CEO and the president, and understanding in depth how to sell a media property was probably one of the biggest things I learned, because that informs everything. That informs content, that informs your formats, it informs how you develop your platform. And one of the first things we did once I started to understand that, one of the most helpful things was that the company was also representing Dude Perfect, which was one of the biggest sports channels on YouTube and still is today. And they had a very defined format, right? They had this trick shots format that just was so unbelievably replicable. And every company picked up the phone and said, we want a trick shot video with Dude Perfect. And it was something that I started to understand from a format development perspective, that although social media is very new and people are consuming it very differently, there's still roots from television, from what we're all used to, that are required to make this a real business. And one of those was developing a format, developing a process around that format where you could replicate it, developing, rituals in the audience. As I mentioned, the Lacrosse Network we were uploading every day, but every day it was a different type of video. We stopped doing that, right? We took a step back and said, how do we develop a show? And so similar to what we're doing today, we had a show that uploaded every Monday that broke down the most important news in lacrosse and our perspective on it. And when we did that, all of a sudden that show built a culture around it, built a community around it. It was called the Weekly Watch. And so what we would do is we would pull together all the biggest clips in lacrosse and put them out every Monday. And Colin and I would talk about the headlines and then clips from our community that, again, to call back to what we were doing earlier, on that show, we would call out what type of clips we wanted for the next episode for you to be featured. So nice. All of a sudden, everything we were doing got packaged into one format that made sense, that was sponsorable. You could have the Weekly Watch presented by Nike, which was a thing that happened. You could have this segment be presented by a company. You could have, we were able to then back into a very clear-cut story of what we were selling, what was the product, what were the metrics around that product, what did the inventory look like? And for things that, for like creative, which is so intangible, you have to make it tangible. You have to make it a purchasable product. And I'd say that was the first lesson in Whistle. And it's interesting because the business informed our format, which then made our creative better, which then made our whole experience as creators better, because we developed consistency, a process around it. We were able to, after every Monday upload, say, how can we make next week's better? How can we make it better? How can we make it better? How can we make it better? And then, what we would continue to do is develop new formats that would upload on the channel. So rather than uploading random videos, we were developing series and formats that had a brand to them, had a culture to them, had a ritual to them, and the audience could latch on to the network. And that's when we started to see much bigger growth.
Yeah, I'm just noticing it go from all of these random clips or like whatever we can find to upload today, because we need to upload every day, to the whole channel having a flywheel, the whole business having a flywheel. Your community engagement is feeding, the weekly show is feeding the advertisers and on from there. And you're like, okay, I understand how this whole thing works in concert rather than being a sporadic set of things.
I'd also say the second lesson that I learned around this is, as creators, it's very confusing what your job is, especially in the beginning. Like, your job is to create, your job is also to sell, your job is also to distribute, your job is also to be the content strategist, your job is to do all the things. And understanding what jobs we needed to do as creators and what jobs other people could do, and developing that trust, I think allowed us to understand, what does it mean to scale? And that was a really important lesson, because when we stepped out, we knew what we were building towards. We knew the org chart of what we wanted to build. So the way we looked at it, when we were first starting, I was the CEO, I was the head of sales, I was all the above. I was legal counsel, I was everything. At that level, and then I had amazing partners in Colin and Julian to help me with the creative. And I was also the host, I was the talent, it was all the above, right? And so what I think we started to realize when we went into Whistle was that being a creator, you didn't need to be at the top of your organization. You actually could be more in the middle, and you needed to be on the content strategy side. You had to be on, obviously on the creative side. You had to deeply understand the audience and care about the content you were making. And you had to spend all your time doing that. And you could build, an operations person. You could build out to a revenue person. You could, and those could be separate agencies. They can be in-house people, but operations and revenue, I think, were two things that we learned. If we didn't do, we could make better content. We could invest more in the format. We could invest more in the connection with the audience. And so I think you start to learn, at least we did in that time, what we needed to do and what we could have other people help us with.
Yeah. I like that, because you've built a lot of structure, in a full business around, not just the channel, but the newsletter and everything else. So let's dive into that. What did it look like to move on from Whistle Sports and go independent again?
There's this really interesting experience that Colin and I both had where we were loving this newfound freedom of being creators, of, being less involved on the business side. Still involved. We were still in every pitch. We were still in, a lot of it, but we had so much support that we loved this feeling of being creators. And I think, being 21 and starting that business and selling it at 23 and or at 24 and now, at this time being 27 years old and the only thing I had done in my career, or sorry, I think it was 26, whatever, doesn't matter. But the only thing I had done in my career was make the Lacrosse Network and work in sports media. I think there's like a natural developmental stage in your 20s where you need to experiment and explore that. I was, as you know, being in any startup, like you are laser focused. It's a blinders on. You're doing one thing. You need to do it extremely well. You need to find what works and then, replicate and scale. That one night, Colin and I had dinner and we were just like, what if we were just creators that could make content about anything? And this was largely inspired by a movement in YouTube of people vlogging, specifically Casey Neistat vlogging, talking about his life and, talking about just anything he wanted to do and this kind of like flexibility and freedom he had that was very attractive and appealing to us. And I think there's a few moments in your career as an entrepreneur where you're lucky enough to have a level of naivete. And there was two moments for me. One was coming out of college thinking I could build a sports network myself. And two was this exact moment thinking that I should just rip the cord, leave the company and start over from scratch. With the confidence that within, a month I would just build back up to the same, revenue level. We would build a brand and everything would be fine. And we just decided we were going to leave. And I remember when we told, the company and people started to learn. At this point, I think there was around 100 people in the company. And the speculation was that Colin and I had raised money to go do like a sports agency, and take some of the clients and do something. And I remember hearing that. I was like, wow, that is so not what we're doing. Like we are literally going to leave and then just explore our creativity. Yeah. And, everyone around us was like, it's a pretty bad idea. Like I remember my dad being like, why would you do that? Why don't you just talk to the people at Whistle about whatever you feel like you're not doing? Just try and do that. Cause things were going really well. Like nothing was going bad. It was just like, I would say 98% what I wanted to do. I was getting, paid very well to create YouTube content and to develop, formats and work with creators and work with brands. But I just had to explore. I didn't have a choice. I knew if I didn't do it then I didn't know when I would do it. And so Colin and I just left. And I remember that first week, there's like day 4 out of the company, Colin picked up the phone and called me and he was sitting on the beach and he was like, hey man, what did we just do? Like, what are we doing? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not positive. Like, I have no idea what we're doing. And we just decided to make. That was it. All we knew was we wanted to make. And we got together and we created a channel called Colin and Samir. And we were like, we're just going to explore. We're just going to make here. And we just committed to uploading one video a week. And I think we were hit with a rude awakening at that moment where, we had a show that about 100,000 people were watching every week. We uploaded our first video and 1,000 people watched it. And we thought the audience would carry over, not really thinking like, oh yeah, that's the lacrosse community. They want to hear us talk about lacrosse. They don't want to see our art films. And we started uploading these like very artsy video essays about Los Angeles and our ideas about life and, just anything that was happening in our head, we were making content about, and 1,000 people were watching. And that was a very, very scary time. It was both creatively liberating, where we were so excited about the work we were putting out. We were pouring hours and hours into the work, and then recognizing we did not have a community. We did not have any path to building a business. It was not going to be a seamless, hey, we were doing this thing over here, now we're doing it over here, and it's the same business. It was not that at all. And yeah, that begun, I would say, some of the most challenging years of my career.
Yeah. I mean, people can dive in on the channel more and see like exactly that path of building up.
Yep.
One thing that I'm curious about right now is what the flywheel looks like for you today in the business. You talked about the the Monday show, the weekly newsletter. But maybe you could break down sort of the content flywheel and then the revenue flywheel as those come together. And so to make it a 3-part question, because those are the worst, and we might as well just keep going. But like a little bit about the team as well, because you've built a whole team around this.
Yeah. So you fast forward 5 years and somehow we figured it out. The only way I give this advice all the time, if you're lost or confused as a creative, the only way out is to create through it. That's it.
Right.
I think that's scary advice, but it is the truth. Like the one thing we never stopped doing, if you look back at the past 5 years on the channel, is we just never stopped uploading. We just didn't. We just kept making, even in the lowest of lows, like that was the thing that we will do no matter what. And we just kept creating. Today, how the flywheel looks, one thing that we found to be really important is that, in representing a community or creating content for a community, we paint everything through the lens of our perspective and our experience over the past 10 years of uploading content to YouTube and being creators. But we want to have a diverse set of voices. So I'd say, one of the most important things we did around where the show is today is develop a writer's room. And that happens on Slack. It's about 15 different people from the creator space, from different facets of it, creators themselves, people who work, with creators, people who are just enthusiasts and love mining, what's happening in our space, where every day, constantly, stuff's being shared in there and perspectives are being shared. And that, I think, was one of the most important things we did, where it used to just be in a vacuum or not a vacuum, but just in a small space of just Colin and I going back and forth, talking about what we cared about in the creator space, and then we'd make a video about it. But expanding that to include more voices, and I think our ultimate goal is actually to include more and more and more, allows us to have this diverse content diet where we are consuming stuff from our community from all different places. From there, we kind of look at it as like a top of the content funnel where we can then decide where those pieces go, right? So like, here's the stories we find interesting. And then we meet as a creative team here in LA in person and talk about and brainstorm which one would make a good YouTube long form episode. What would make a good YouTube short? What would make a good tweet? What would make a good newsletter article? And this all gets painted through the lens of our value prop, which is to educate and empower the next generation of creators. So I think that's a really important piece, is that all the stuff at the top of the funnel has to pass through these different pieces. And I'll give you those. There's 4 specific pieces that it has to pass through. Number 1, it has to be relevant to our audience. So first thing is everyone on the team has to deeply understand who the audience is. We define it as aspiring creators, career creators, people in the creator industry. And then we have a 4th bucket, which is non-believers, which is kind of like tomorrow's supporters, people who maybe have no reason to believe in the creator economy yet, but through our content, they will convert. So we understand everything through those lens. Is this piece of content relevant to that audience? Yes or no. That's our first checkpoint. Our next one is, does it deliver on the value prop? Is it educational? Can you actually learn something about how to be a creator? Can you learn something about how to work with creators? Can you learn something here? That's a really important piece. We always say, what's the creator takeaway? What's the takeaway for the industry? How does what is the actionable takeaway from this story? If there isn't one, then it doesn't really fit into our content. The next one, which I think is incredibly important and something I talked about in our first business as well, is process. Does this fit into our process? Does it fit into one of our formats? And how can it very easily fit into either our writing schedule or our video schedule or our podcast schedule? Like if it doesn't fit into that, it's a great idea, but it just might not work for us.
Is there an example of something that you made it fit the audience, made it past the other filters, and then just didn't fit in the process? You're like, we want to do this, but it doesn't fit the process. And so we're moving on.
Yeah. A lot of times that's interviews. Okay. A lot of times we want to interview someone. Luckily, what's interesting is early on, a lot of those didn't work. Creator interviews are fantastic. We love hearing perspectives from creators. A lot of times it's really challenging because we want to do them in person. We can do them over Zoom or over Riverside. Yep. But one of the challenges is that an interview, the way we cut it, is very straining on our team because we really really invest in the storytelling of an interview,
Yes.
where we might record for 3 hours, but we're only putting out 35 minutes. And so it's actually way harder than doing an episode where it's just Colin and I, and we can control the story. You can't really control the story as well in an interview. And then additionally, like, the reality of YouTube is it's all based on click-through rate, right? Are people going to click on this? Is the audience going to find this interesting? And at scale, a lot of how our business works is viewership on YouTube. So the type of creator we can interview who's going to, be supportive of click-through rate and something that at scale, a lot of people want to watch. There's a limited grouping of creators that's going to hit all those buckets. That said, as we developed, the newsletter, the Published Press, we are now including a lot of creator interviews there. And now we're starting to explore, like, what does an audio show look like that's creator interviews? Because we think it's important, but doesn't right now fit into our video process. We were able to get it fit into our written process. And so that's an example where there's a creator who reaches out, has an amazing story. We want to cover it. It doesn't work for the show, but it works for the press, or it doesn't work for the show, but it works for a YouTube short. And so it does have to funnel through this process to make sure that we can produce a best-in-class show every Monday. The last piece is monetization. So you start at the top: audience, value prop, process, monetization. From a monetization standpoint, we're in the media business. We have to make sure that this story fits into one of our processes that is also connected to our monetization. So, does this fit into the Published Press? Great. That's a monetized platform. Does it fit in the YouTube channel? Great. That's a monetized platform. We have to evaluate stuff based on that as well.
Yeah. I like that process because as a creator, you can get pulled around to so many different things, right? You could make literally anything on a Monday morning. You're like, what are we going to do? It could be anything. And so having that to keep you narrowed in and refined, there's a lot of things that I write about that I want to write about that aren't a fit because I follow a similar process. And so then I just put them on the ideas or the not now board. Yeah. And you can evaluate that like every 6 months and go, oh, is this going in a direction where this would be more interesting because I've written down 8 of these things that require a different format or require a different audience. But you're not like deviating from your plan every week in a small way.
I think it's one of the challenges of being a creator is, we talk about this where, creators start out with, something they want to express. Like for us on this channel, we wanted to express the experience of being a creator. So a lot of what we told in the beginning was our story about being a creator. Then we started telling other creators' stories. And over time, what ends up happening as you build a business around it is you go from being, an artist with the desire to express, and you start sliding over the scale over to being a distributor. So a distributor is like someone at, Netflix or at a movie studio who's making a decision on what to make based on, the audience. Right. That's why we see Spider-Man, then next Spider-Man, then Spider-Man, then Spider-Man, because people are going to buy tickets to go see Spider-Man. And so we also have to make decisions like that, right? Like as a creator, you're right in the middle of being an artist and being a distributor, probably with shading more towards a distributor because you're thinking in terms of, what does the audience want to watch? And you actually have to play a dance between the 3 things that for us define your content market fit. It's what does the audience want to watch? What does the platform want? And then what do you want to make? And if all 3 of those boxes are checked, you can really find a fit and a format that works. But 2/3 of those boxes are, what the audience wants and what the platform wants. And, I think that's where, as you start to develop a process around it, it can get really challenging, but you have to also want to make it. That's the 1/3 part of that, 33%. If that's not there, it's not going to work. But you have to think like a distributor.
Right.
To make this work.
Is there a time that there's things you really wanted to make that just don't fit? Where you're like, as a creator, I want to do this. And as a distributor, it doesn't make sense?
All the time. But there's ways where you can start to think about how to distribute that, right? Like there's a lot of behind the scenes content that's happening in our office that I find to be really interesting. I've always wanted to kind of vlog it and give a little bit of that like startup feel where you're getting a peek into our world, our process, how everything works. Right now, that would, if we added more content, it would strain our current team. We don't really have a distribution outlet because on the Colin and Samir channel, people are expecting the Colin and Samir show every Monday. They're not expecting vlogs. But you start to think, if we can develop a process around that, I think maybe it could go on a secondary channel, or maybe that could go in our Patreon or subscription, right? Maybe it could go in the published press more, which is actually something we're doing. We have a segment called Under the Hood in our newsletter where we talk about things that are working and not working in our own creator journey. So that's an example of, again, something that like I have a desire to tell a story. It has to go through this process of understanding, like, is it relevant to the audience, to have a value prop? Which process does it fit into? Is it on one of our monetized platforms?
Yep. So on monetization, what's the breakdown between the different, like, what are the main monetization channels that you have now, and what's the revenue split between them?
The lion's share comes from sponsorship, if not 100%, comes from advertising and sponsorships. Those are split across different formats.
Yep.
But we are a partnerships business. We have sold merch. We've sold an NFT. We've sold a storytelling course, but our business runs on partnerships. And I think what's important is, like, anyone who's in the media business, that's still the primary business model is partnerships. And so, for us, like, partnerships on the Colin and Samir show, to be specific, I would say make up 95% of our revenue. So that tangibly looks like every Monday when you watch an episode of the show, you will see an advertiser, you'll see a link in our description, you'll have a call to action. And we like to focus on very relevant advertisers. All of our advertisers buy, packages across multiple episodes. We like to have fewer advertisers that buy for longer periods of time so that we can tell more stories with them. We can develop them as characters in our universe. And we like to curate those advertisers in the same way we curate our stories, which are what matters to this community and why does it matter? And so if you look at our advertisers, they're all relevant to creators and how to turn your career as a creator on, right? How to flip it on, how to turn it into a career. That's all of our advertisers. So the lion's share, 95% of our revenue, comes from brand sponsorships. Our YouTube AdSense is like pretty like minimal piece of that pie, but it's becoming more significant as our viewership is increasing. But we've never connected any part of our business to platform revenue. I just don't believe in it. I think it's too variable. There's too many things that are out of our control. So, we put out a tweet, I think last year YouTube, from the platform, we made $107,000 on 107 million views on the platform. And so, that is now getting more significant. I think the majority of that revenue came in Q4 as our channel started to experience exponential growth, as the ad budgets are more significant in Q4. But, we don't connect any part of our business to.
You're not saying, now that I have this AdSense revenue, I'm going to hire someone, like I'm going to use this to cover this person's salary and all that, because it's just not predictable enough.
It's just not predictable. So we like to think of things as like monthly recurring revenue and monthly recurring expenses. And, we're spending, like I can tell you just flat out, like we spend probably like around $60,000 to $65,000 a month just to operate the business. Yeah. And so, it gets pretty significant. We have 10 people that work with us right now. We have a growing now office space that we need to house those people. And we have equipment, we have, travel to different creators' places. We have a lot going on. And, we have to look at our revenue and our partnerships in ways that are supportive of that.
Yeah. I'm always interested in the team creative approach. There's a lot of solo creators out there, and you've gone heavy on the team side. And I think it will result in a lot less money in the short term and a much more substantial business and a lot more money in the long term, as you are able to build out systems rather than, like 4 or 5 years from now being like, oh man, as a solo creator, I'm so burned out because I've been doing this grind for a long time, but I had tons of profits in the early days, or the middle period. You want to comment on that side of it?
Yeah. I think we as creators are just naturally built for teams. Like Colin and I both also grew up playing team sports, both playing lacrosse. And what's funny is we talk about our office as like, it's a creative team. Like everyone has a different role in the episodes. Everyone has a different role in the team, and we all have to work in concert. So I think from a just lifestyle desire perspective, my dream is to walk into a room of creatives and build things together. Like that is just my dream life. So I naturally just gravitate towards team. I also think like having like creativity is so much about collaboration. And with Colin and I being, the talent, the guys who are also building the company, the entrepreneurs behind it, as we start to build and build and build, we also have to find ways to scale ourselves. And we wanted to do that early. So for example, like if we're getting on the road to go do a speaking engagement, or for example, in March, we're going to be at South by Southwest for a week. If it's just him and I, like we can't make a show every Monday. It's going to be really hard as we start to grow as thought leaders in the space, as creators in the space. So, we wanted to build a foundation of how can we make our content on a weekly basis, no matter what. And that comes to, I think it comes back to that concept of process and being very process oriented. So, we were making videos that only Colin and I could make. We were making videos that were vlogs that were very personal. We were making videos that had a different style every time. And, we brought on an editor who was supporting us. And, we were also making a podcast every week. And we started to realize that the podcast was something that we would make every week, no matter what. No matter how busy our week was, we would record a podcast. And that's when we took a step back and said, well, now that we have some support, someone to help us editing, what would it look like if we filmed the podcast and he cut the podcast? And so that was one of the first things we did, and start to look at that. And then we looked at that and we said, could we do that every week? And so we started actually uploading that to a second YouTube channel, once a week, filming our podcast and putting it out. And in weeks where we were struggling to put out a YouTube video, we were always putting out a podcast on YouTube. And that's when Colin and I took a step back and said, I think we need to focus in on this podcast. I think this talk show format is the one that we can make and the one that we can build a team around, because there's a foundation where it's relatively simple, right? It's you and I talking. It's a 3-camera setup. We know we can have help doing this. We know we can record this. We can go for a week and it can be edited. And that gave us a foundation of what to build on top of, right? So it was us filming that, picking the topics, trying to, make the storytelling work in a talk show format, putting B-roll on top, putting graphics. And then basically every one of those desires became a new team member, right? A new role. Hey, we want to have more animations because we believe that as we're educating people, it's easier in visuals, and we're developing curriculum that require animations. Let's get an animator. Hey, we know we need an audio engineer, or hey, we know we need music in some of these parts. And then we're going to start selling 60-second ad integrations in this. We need someone to cut those ad integrations. So we basically, built templates for what the show could look like, so that if we were gone, the show could still be edited and the show could still come out. And we knew what the next week's show looked like. Like I can tell you, every Monday this year, there's going to be an episode of the Colin and Samir show. It'll have, the same intro sound. It'll follow the same format. It'll be it'll be about the same type of topics. And so that predictability allows you to layer creativity on top of it. You build like a foundation of a format that you can make, and then you can build on top of that. And I think we also know that in this world, it's not 4 episodes and then you've made it, right? It's hundreds of episodes.
Yes.
So if you need to produce hundreds of episodes, you need to know what those episodes are, and you need to be able to have a foundation where you can just get improved 10% every time. If you're reinventing the wheel every week, you're going to go a little crazy.
Yeah. And I think you see that in any show that's on television, you see that where they have these set segments.
Mm-hmm.
Here they're going to their correspondent, here, like whether it's comedy or news or whatever else, they're putting it into a format that they can tweak rather than leave it up to chance. We just have a few minutes left. I'd love to touch on growth for a second. The channel just hit 500,000 subscribers. Congrats. That's a huge, huge milestone.
Thank you.
2-part question here. What are the things, like what's actually working to drive growth? And then maybe what's something that you thought would work that just did?
I think to drive growth, like the thing that we've always, thought about is just like, we care a lot about organic growth, but one thing that's happening is just like YouTube is a library. There's a compounding effect, right? Mm-hmm. And compound interest is an incredibly powerful force. And so as we went through 9 months of uploading the exact same format, every Monday, people can watch multiple videos. And if they're interested in one, they'll likely be interested in another. So for example, over the we didn't upload for 3 weeks during the holidays, and we grew from 500,000 subs to 534,000 subs. And we didn't upload. And so that means, and what we're seeing is like, and the channel did 7.5 million views during those 3 weeks. So, and those views are on old videos, meaning like we're building an evergreen library of content. And that is something that's incredibly powerful about YouTube specifically. It's a search engine, but once someone finds it, the algorithm is going to recommend them similar content. And if your content follows the same format, it's easy to latch onto, it's about the same topics, that will compound. It just will. And I think that's something that we are starting to experience now, is that every upload is not just, providing value that week. It's providing value in like getting essentially archived into a library that can provide you value for the next 10 years. Casey Neistat, for example, is still driving millions of views a month and he doesn't upload. But he has a library of content that's interesting. And so I think that from a growth perspective, that's why it's important to find a format. And that's why it's important to be consistent, because you can build a library that can pay dividends over long periods of time. In terms of what we thought might work and hasn't, I don't know if I can think of something specifically. We have tried some paid marketing. Very little experiments in paid marketing does not work for us, at least. And maybe we don't know how to do it on YouTube, but I think that the most important thing, like I've just basically completely thrown that out the door and said, the most important thing for us is to produce content people actually want to watch, and more importantly, people want to share. And then we have enough of it that they can watch 5 episodes, in a row and never feel like there's a lack of content or value.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on is you've made this move, starting with YouTube and then going to a newsletter. What were some of the things that you've learned? Actually, I guess first, why make that move? Yeah. Why launch the newsletter? And then second, what have you learned in the process of getting the first 10, 15, 20,000 subscribers?
Yeah. So for us, similar to what I talked about with the podcast and the show, it was about, there's 2 things that it was about. One was covering more stories. YouTube is incredibly specific. What you can make a YouTube video about, what you can build a thumbnail around is incredibly specific. And that felt and feels limiting at times. And so we wanted a space where we had a direct relationship with the community that was interested, and we could provide stories that the only barrier was if we had a good subject line and had developed a good rapport with the audience, that they would click and open it and read it. It wasn't a barrier of algorithms. It wasn't a barrier of title and thumbnail. It wasn't a barrier of, view duration. It was a barrier of like, are you a part of this community? Are you interested? Then we are going to curate the stories that matter to you. So that was number one. Number 2 was around this idea of scale and being able to scale beyond our ability to create video or create audio, or beyond the voices of Colin and Samir, and add more perspectives in the room. We'll get there, but even right now we have an awesome writer who writes the newsletter every week. We have a team that helps us edit it. Colin and I are still the managing editors and very much in the weeds of every word that gets sent out on a Tuesday and Friday. We are extremely involved. But we can do that. Like, again, go back to a tangible example. When we're at South by Southwest, I have no concerns about getting two or even 3, if we're at that point at that time, newsletters out and covering 6 amazing creator stories that are providing value to our community and our audience. So that ability is really liberating, because during that week, even when you think about our video side, we're not going to be in our studio. So that means we have to pre-record something. We're not able to react to any news that happens unless we do it in audio form or in written form. And so building that format that allows us to have a deeper connection with the audience, allows us to have a process that's reasonable, scalable. And then I just believe that like newsletters, for me personally, like I'm a part of the newsletter community. I enjoy receiving newsletters. I enjoy reading stories. I enjoy curation. And I also think that newsletters support both rituals, routines, and identity, where the newsletters that I'm subscribed to, if you look at my list of newsletters, they kind of tell you who I am and what I'm interested in. And when I open them, I like feeling like I'm part of that community. I like feeling like, and being reinforced that this is my identity and this is the community I'm a part of. And I also like the ritual and routine of, like, for us, when we send on a Tuesday and Friday, if you're someone who opens on those days, you're grounded and it's Tuesday. And I think that's cool. And I think that's really fun. And like, it's Friday and we're going to round up what happened in the week. So, I think building those rituals and routines of like on Monday, you get the show, on Tuesday, you get a newsletter, on Friday, you get another newsletter, and trying to now fill out the week of helping you build a content diet and a routine and feeling in touch with the community. That's what's important to us.
Yeah, I love it. I particularly love how meticulous or deliberate you've been with building a business that supports the life that you want. So you have the team around you as a creator. You know that like, one, on a day-to-day basis, you want that in-person studio where you can show up and you can work with a creatives team. But then you want to build a system that lets you not be in the studio, that lets you go to South by or somewhere else and have all of this still work. So it's good.
That's like lifestyle design, I think, is so important for creators, because there's a lot of creators, even especially us, our experience when we stepped out and had this vision of an aspirational lifestyle being solo creators, it was really lonely. And it was really scary and isolating. And I think we quickly recognized that's not what we wanted. We actually wanted to be a part of a team. We actually wanted to have an office to go to. We just weren't the guys who were going to be, fully remote and flying around and doing things like that. Like we wanted a home base. So I do think like writing down what's important to you as a creator is a really good exercise. Like what we do this thing called the perfect day, where we regularly we'll update it, and both Colin and I will just write down, what does our perfect day look like? And I'll write it from morning to night. Like I wake up, I have, a slow morning where I can have a cup of coffee with my wife. I can go on a walk. I can journal. I can read. I can walk into our office. I can, brainstorm with our team. I can produce a show. I can edit the news. Like there's certain things that I think just writing down what's important to you and then building we're fortunate enough to now build our business around what's important to us, but we did it. We did this exercise even when we didn't have a business and we couldn't figure anything out. We're trying to manifest what we wanted all of this to become. And Colin and I had coffee on Saturday and said, like, I can't believe this is it. Like we did it. This is what we always wanted.
It's a good feeling. It's really fun to get to as a creator. And I think through your content, through my content, like we're trying to do the same thing of helping as many other creators get to that point where they can be like, I'm spending my time the way I want. I'm earning my money the way that I want. And I'm creating things in the world that I'm really proud of. So where should people go to subscribe to the newsletter, the channel, everything else?
So if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, it's thepublishpress.com. You can sign up there. You'll get an email every Tuesday and Friday. And if you want to check out our content, just search Colin and Samir. You can find us on YouTube, across platforms. But if you want to watch the videos, it's every Monday on YouTube. And you can also listen, whether you listen on Spotify or Apple or however you listen to podcasts.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Samir, thanks I can't even talk. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.